After checking out 2004's Flight to Hell last year, my interest in the works of Passeri were well and truly piqued. So, when it came to selecting the movies that I'd cover this season, something from Passeri was pretty much a given. But I wasn't entirely sure which one would be the best fit because I don't really know if Flight to Hell was supposed to be the outlier or the rule for him as a director. So, I decided to go back to the person who first introduced me to Al's work, Pecking for Good TV, to watch his reviews to see if they'd be a good match for what was planned this season. They all seemed like they could have worked here well enough, but I did notice something. One of the movies Al had made was unaccounted for. That film was 2000's The Mummy theme park. The online plot synopses weren't exactly clear as to what this film really even was, but it was available for sale on DVD, so I figured it would make sense to check this movie out, as it doesn't seem to have had a lot of representation online. And, with Daniel being the one to get me into these, well, it would have been rude not to invite him back after the wonderful time we had dissecting the Child's Play movie that had nothing to do with Child's Play that was, Stranger, a soulmate of Chucky. So, Daniel, how's it hanging?
Not too bad. Thank you for having me back. Looking forward to going 3 out of 5 in Al Passeri movies. Pretty much the only exploitation wise guy keeping the faith past 1995. This shameless yet tongue-in-cheek cash-in on 1999's The Mummy was pretty much the best thing Italian genre cinema had to offer in the year 2000. Whether or not that is a backhanded compliment is something the viewers are going to have to stay with us to find out.
Oh, absolutely, and great to have you back, man. So, the Mummy theme park, and we open with what appears to be a priestess communicating to the gods to create chaos and mayhem in the form of earthquakes. They answer a request sending tremors across the desert that create a fissure. We then cut to a week later, where a very wealthy sultan has hired an archaeological team led by one Professor Mason to investigate the newly formed fissure, as it appears to have revealed an ancient tomb. The professor reveals that this is in fact a necropolis for a long-lost pharaoh and his servants. The sultan's delighted, but the professor has a warning to heed, that the tomb has been cursed and that they should proceed with caution. The Sultan dismisses this pretty quickly and almost immediately calls for the tomb to be opened. As one of the group tries to open the tomb, he finds himself on the stabby end of someone's throwing knife. They eventually though manage to crack the tomb open and are greeted with a blinding white light. It's then that we jump forward in time again by 6 months as we pick up in the US as we meet Danny and Julia, a hip and swinging photographer and his assistant just wrapping up on a somewhat saucy shoot. Danny's boss receives a call from the Sultan inquiring about hiring some of his team for a somewhat unusual high priority shoot. He's willing to pay them top dollar, but he wants top quality. Initially, he asks Danny's boss to do the shoot, but he turns it down in favour of suggesting Danny and Julia. On hearing the news that they're to be shipped out to the middle of the desert with little say on the matter, Julia's delighted as she sees it as something of a vacation opportunity. But Danny is much less keen on the idea. In a somewhat pointless sequence, which is repeated multiple times across the film's runtime, but I'm mentioning it once here for context, we see the Sultan looking frustrated in amongst his harem as he watches a woman belly dance. After a while, he pulls out a phone and calls a different part of the palace, where the priestess from the beginning of the film answers. He asks her to come to his quarters and dance for him, but she dismisses him and is somewhat perturbed by the implication that she's equal to one of his harem girls. This is Nekbet, a traditionalist of Egyptian culture. She's well taught in the old ways of ancient Egypt and sees the culture as something worth preserving, respecting and appreciating. She also has an absolute disdain and distrust for any of the tourism industry around Egypt, seeing it as a disrespectful bastardisation of her way of life. The reason I bring that up is because as soon as we've established her, Danny and Julia arrive at the Sultan's palace to be greeted by Nekbet. And almost immediately they start acting like big dumb American tourist types, treating the palace and surrounding areas like a trip to the city zoo. As you can imagine, Nekbet's thrilled by this and puts the pair in their place pretty quickly. Anyway, what follows is a bit of a comedy runaround as the pair get settled into their accommodation. Julia discovers that her bathroom is comedically large, obligatory semi-nude scene, there's a bit where Nekbet puts a curse on Julia, causing her to flee her room and head to Danny's room, but when faced with a literal death curse or a night with a rather lechy Danny, it turns out that Julia would rather risk the death curse. Shortly after that, someone throws a rock with some parchment tied to it through Danny's window. He doesn't think much of it, however, despite the fact that this isn't inner city New York, it's an armed palace in the middle of the desert. The next day, the pair finally get to meet the Sultan, and after the previous night of broken windows, death curses, and a total lack of clarity as to what exactly they're actually being hired to do, they both are understandably a little upset. But before things can escalate, he offers to explain everything. He says that he wants Danny and Julia to help document and illustrate his greatest vision, the Mummy Theme Park. A place that aims to allow tourists to fully experience 4,000 years of ancient Egyptian history by literally travelling through the necropolis that the Fisher revealed via train. There'll be opportunities like being able to see how Egyptian life was centuries ago, and, the big selling point of the tour, the chance to meet several actual living, breathing pharaohs. The pair are a little sceptical at first, but the Sultan offers to give them a tour of the park and facilities so that they can get a better idea of what to expect for the shoot. They head to the control room, and it's revealed that every room in the palace and every corner of the park is being monitored on sound and vision around the clock by the Sultan's armed guards. They also reveal that, when they say you'll get to meet the pharaohs, they really aren't kidding, as we see a mummy get unwrapped and brought back to life via a mixture of regenerative chemicals and robotics. The idea being that they've been able to organically reconstruct the kings as best they can, but where bones are missing, robotics have been implemented. When they ask how all this technology has come to be, given that most of it clearly doesn't exist outside of this lab, Professor Mason pops up to say, computers! And basically that's it.
Passeri is a craftsman, first and foremost. Not a stylist, not much of a storyteller either, if I'm honest. Exposition is dumped on us with what must have been dozens of pages of dialogue used to set the scene and give Passeri more of a chance to show off his props and set dressing. The fact that a good 12 minutes of this film takes place in a train booth, and not a convincing one at that, clearly shows where Passeri's priorities lie. It is tracking shot after tracking shot of Passeri throwing every trick in the Harryhausen book at us, from miniatures to back projection to fisheye lenses, because it wouldn't be an Italian fantasy film without them. After this cute trip round Passeri's production house, the audience is made to endure more padding with the return of the harem subplot. Another pointless tangent involving a wizard of some sort creating an illusion of the source of the Sultan's thirst out of burnt lizards and whatever else was left over after making the Powerpuff Girls. When he fails to satisfy the Sultan, they kill him. I'm not expecting Shakespeare, but these cynically implemented cliches are just too much. A complete waste of the audience's time, all of this, and don't even get me started on the performances within these harem scenes. It's a total bloody minstrel show. After that nonsense, Danny and Julia talk about how intriguing the film's plot is, until Danny visits the professor to ask why someone threw a gift shop paperweight through his window the other night. The professor analyses the note attached to the thing and reveals it to be some sort of death threat about the theme park offending the gods and all of that. Again, quite a pointless scene due to the sender obviously being the witch who made a man's head explode earlier on. I think the film is trying to be more foreboding than suspenseful, but it's just not working. Thankfully though, the third act comes out of nowhere to save the day as Nekhebet begins to resurrect the pharaohs and they start killing all the guards. We get a lot of Poverty Row bollocks here, from the mummy's yellow tinted point of view to severed limbs to the awkward intercutting of scenes of Julia trying various pantomime costumes. We are now at the last 20 minutes of this, and our two American protagonists are chased by some old guys in bandages whilst the Sultan's theme park crumbles around him at the hands of Nekhebet. What we are treated to in this mad dash to the finish is the incredibly melting mummy, CGI gouging, and a stop motion mummification, all of which obviously had a lot of love and attention put into it, and you can't really get mad at. I just wish that the rest of the movie was as gonzo as its third act all the way throughout. The main issue, like with many Italian genre films I've watched before, is the engagement of the director was prioritised over the engagement of the audience, and the result for yours truly was dithering.
I'm honestly trying to find the right words to exactly express how I feel about the script for this thing, because with the best will in the world, it's hard not to look at this film and immediately think that it's some kind of tech demo aimed at selling the special effects within the movie to theme parks or film studios, with only a tiny bit of story hashed out to fill in the gaps. At its core, this film is basically Jurassic Park crossed with Westworld in that episode of The Simpsons where they go to Itchy and Scratchy Land. But instead of dinosaurs or cowboys, it's mummies. Everything else that happens in this film beyond that is either padding or just bizarre. And it's kind of hard to really be able to give a well-rounded opinion on a film that seems to feel a script is secondary to the visuals. The act structure, for example, is incredibly uneven, with the first act eating up just over half of the runtime, basically everything from the opening titles through to Danny and Julia meeting the Sultan. We then have a second act that's breakneck and barely covers 15 minutes as we go through all of the context of what the Sultan's up to, right up to the point where the park goes inevitably wrong, and then the third act is an overly long run around a cave system that would give some Tom Baker era episodes of Doctor Who a run for their money in terms of time killing. The lopsided act structuring means the pacing goes to the wall as well, with an almost stop-start attitude happening in which we'll get a little bit of plot sandwiched between achingly long periods of just total eccentricity. For my money, the most bizarre addition to this film is the sequences involving the harem. They get multiple scenes across the film's runtime, and every single one of them is basically just them being catty with each other, inevitably leading to a punch-up that makes Glow look like a ladies who lunch social. It has no reason to be here, but Passeri seems oddly drawn to their repeated inclusion. There's also several incidents of just ultra-casual domestic violence that weirdly isn't really commented on and is shown in a fairly passive way on screen. The Sultan will just casually slap his harem members around, and the film almost treats that as a comedy moment because it never gets referenced, brought up or mentioned. The sequences just happen and then the film moves on, which I thought was actually a bit disturbing, honestly. I mean, I can kind of understand that this helps to establish that the Sultan's a bit of a dickhead, but we already pretty much can gather he's a bit of a dickhead based on all the dickheaded things that he's done across the film's whole runtime. The dialogue doesn't exactly thrill either. Given this is an Italian movie, they've gone for the tried and, well, I can't say tested, but let's say tolerated method of shooting the film with a mixed language cast and then dubbing the entire film in post into the language of whatever country is buying it. As such, the dialogue strains under the weight of the cast, who slather ham on this thing like you wouldn't believe. There's not one subtle vocal performance here, and as such, even the dialogue that scans somewhat fluidly ends up sounding exaggerated and over the top because of their choice of delivery. Even so, it's not the best writing in the world, with plenty of scenes being overly wordy to help further pad the runtime. A lot of emphasis is on telling and showing rather than just letting the Cinean direction do the legwork, and a lot of what's written isn't exactly naturalistic dialogue either. Furthermore, the tone is all over the place, dancing from vague attempts at pathos through to full-on Looney Tunes meets Benny Hill style comedy runarounds. It's beyond difficult to get a clock on what exactly Passeri and his writer were trying to convey with this script, other than my theory that they weren't really trying to convey anything other than, look at our cool special effects, wouldn't they look great in your movie? In my opinion, the script's chaotic. It doesn't work as a movie script, it feels only half finished, but because it's so unusual, weirdly paced and odd, it kind of won me over a bit in the same way that Flight to Hell did. It's absolutely not great, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least bemused and somewhat entertained across the runtime. I feel it could have absolutely been shorter, and honestly, if they just wanted to do a loosely structured tech demo, I'd have probably still watched that. But what's here, while imperfect, was oddly captivating to me.
The screenplay was written with Al Passeri's strengths and most likely existing assets in mind. Whole scenes exist just to display the art direction and special effects, which, whilst charming, are in no way capable of carrying a film, as if special effects alone can ever carry a film. Also, what the hell is up with the whole Sultan thing? As I mentioned earlier on, this film is certainly cashing in on the '99 blockbuster The Mummy. That explains the Egypt setting, but What is with all the Egyptians acting and dressing up like they are in some 1930s adventure serial? Some of this stuff here makes Fu Manchu look like it was shot yesterday. The only reason I can imagine this being is that it highlights the artificiality of the whole theme park, which plays a key role in the plot. But then again, there's no suggestion that the Egyptians are indulging in a mythical interpretation of their country's past. It's just a minstrel show, like I said. The two Americans and the Brit Bongo scientist can act like they are in 2000, but everyone else has to pretend the Ottoman Empire is still a thing. What is up with that, you wacky Italians?
The script was written by Anthony Pedicini. He has one writing credit, this film, with only 2 other credits to his name, one being an art department role and the other being his last credit, which was a directing credit for a segment of Drive-In Grindhouse in 2018. The film was directed by Al Passeri, who we spoke about in detail during our Flight to Hell review. But as an interesting extra bit of information, the tech demo callouts I mentioned earlier aren't entirely unfounded, because Al's main gig outside of filmmaking is working on weird and wonderful animatronics. His main drive seems to be animatronic self-playing bands, think Chuck E. Cheese and You're Not a Million Miles Off. But he's also invented a rickshaw that drives people to wherever they need to go, and at the time of publishing he's currently working on an animatronic chimp that can solve a Rubik's Cube, which I wish him every luck on. On the direction front, to say that this is a bit of a mixed bag would be an understatement. As always, I try to split my opinion on direction into 2 fields, whether the director has been able to successfully corral all aspects of the production into delivering a coherent and clear production, and whether the end result has the distinct markings of the director who created it. It's not enough for a film to just be shot competently, it needs to feel like Al was the one who helped make it what it is. In regards to the latter, this absolutely passes the test. There is no mistaking this for anything other than an Al Passeri movie. We have the weird use of special effects, both practical and digital, the disorienting editing, the weird over-reliance on artificial sets. Flight to Hell was pretty much entirely shot on a green screen. This film was largely shot via back projection, colour separation overlay and some very rudimentary green screen work. It's pretty much exactly what I expected from Al at this point in his filmmaking career. And again, if the aim was to solely entertain, then to me, on this front, he gets a big thumbs up. In regards to the former point, however, it's a massive fail from me. Almost no aspect of this film outside of maybe the special effects work seems to have been thought through or considered. The camera work is largely flat, the cast don't really seem to know exactly what's going on, set space is left largely unused, with 90% of the film basically being people sat in chairs or in bed just firing exposition back and forth, with little to no actual use of props and the feeling like the cast have been bolted to the spot because they've either been told not to move around the frame too much, or they haven't been instructed what to do at all, so they're playing it safe. In short, this is pretty much the perfect example of a director who has interest in only one aspect of the production and has put a lot of time into that aspect of the production, fucking everything else off in the process, or, at minimum, doing the bare minimum to keep it afloat without ever considering that these departments need to cohabit in order to produce the best results.
I describe Al Passeri's direction here in 2 words: misguided priorities. Obviously, the crew that worked on the art direction and special effects loved what they did and were in no way afraid of showing it. You can't really fault the chintzy effects, but you can fault Passeri for not being able to weave them into an engaging story. The script was designed around the special effects to exaggerate the production value as much as possible. The dialogue is purely expository, the characters are cardboard, and the pacing is abysmal. There is just enough of a story here to make you wish there was a better one being told. Mummy's Theme Park is a prime example of why you show and don't tell, and why no story at all is better than a mediocre one.
I've alluded to the sets and the practical effects across this review, so it's probably fair to talk about them a little bit too. In terms of the sets themselves, they're a mixed ability. At their best, for a relatively low-budget production, I was quite impressed. The Sultan's Palace utilises matte paintings to reasonable effect, and the cave systems, while a bit repetitive, do fit the tone quite nicely. There's also some genuinely nice attempts at experimentation. They don't work, but it's nice to see them try. The one that stuck out to me was probably in the bath sequence where there's a waterfall in the bathroom, and to give the illusion of a thick and powerful waterfall stream, they've taken some translucent chrome effect plastic wrap, draped it down the side of a rock face, and then ran a small amount of water down it. On DVD and lower resolution, this could easily pass unnoticed as an actual waterfall. It was only me rewinding the film to check it on a big screen that I realised what they'd tried to do. On the other end of the spectrum, however, the worst parts of this are below even some student film standards. Certain shots of the Sultan's harem den reek of reshot in Passeri's garage with no money vibes. And when they experiment with practical effects here and it doesn't work, it's laughably embarrassing. The worst instance being a shot where our gang visit the control room, and in order to make it appear like it's this grand sweeping corridor of people, they've stuck a mirror to the wall of the set and got 3 guards to sit in front of it, and then angled the lighting and camera in such a way that it gives the impression that there's this endless corridor of guards. It's embarrassing. Fortunately, where the practical effects work, they work really quite well, with the mummies all looking oozy, grimy and rotted to great effect. CGI is used sparingly here, barring for the final act, and is largely aimed at smoothing over narrative issues or trying to make kill scenes pop a bit more. While the back projection is more miss than hit in my opinion, it's also nice to see model work like this getting rolled out as late in the day as 2000. It's not handled as well as it could be, but when it is used effectively, it did surprise me at just how well it was handled.
Despite all of the sets and practical effects looking very cheap, nothing seems half-assed either. You could tell a lot of effort was put into the side of the production that brought Passeri to the dance. It's just a shame none of that effort was spared for the script, which does the bare minimum in threading together these cheap frills on display.
On the Cine front, to me, about 2/3 of the film consists of some of the most generic, by-the-numbers and basic cinematography possible. It's all shot for function over style, with minimal fluctuations here and there, just little flourishes that make you think, had Al cared a bit more about how this thing looked, that it could have been something altogether a bit grander. As mentioned, however, when this thing goes low quality, it falls below some of the lesser offerings of the SOV genre in terms of quality. And that's saying something. Compositional choices are slack. It, for the most part, seems to be a case of plopping the camera down in a locked off position, maybe occasionally cutting to a head and shoulder shot before pulling back out to a mid-wide. It's super dull. And the editing does almost nothing to help in that regard, making it feel like they just put what shots worked together, with no consideration for whether the edit needed the shots, what would help make the sequence breathe or feel natural, or what even could be done in terms of reframing the footage to get the best out of it. It's all very I'm not being paid enough for this shit in terms of its attitude. That goes for pretty much everything barring the last act, in which the film pretty much does a hard 180, and suddenly the flattened functional lighting becomes moody, there's some shadow play thrown in, shot experimentation takes off with low and high angles, actual tracking and panning shots and other experimental effects are worked in with the practical elements. The colours become so much more focused and considered in how they're utilised. It basically feels like for 50 minutes of this hour and 25 film it was stalling to get to the effects package, and then for the last half hour or so it pumped everything it had into that closing 30 minutes to make it look and feel the best it could possibly be. Which is beyond frustrating to me because it left me thinking, why couldn't the rest of the film look like this? Or even, why couldn't they have just spread this quality out across the whole runtime instead of giving me 50 minutes of straight pass acceptability followed up with 30 decent minutes?
Most Italian genre films past the early 1970s used cinema verite techniques to make the most of their budget, most notably taking the option to shoot on location for bargain production value. None of the Passeri films I've seen feature much, if any, on-location shooting, which incidentally makes his productions seem very un-Italian. The last footnote before Passeri for Italian genre movies was the products of Joe D'Amato's Filmarage company, and nearly every one of those was shot entirely on location. So for such a late period genre film to be shot almost entirely on a film set is pretty much unheard of, and makes Passeri's movies singular in that regard. The cinematography of Mummy's Theme Park is very unadventurous, but the charm lies not in where the frame is and more of what's in it.
Performance-wise, this is an Italian film directed by Passeri. I feel like that should tell you everything you need to know about how the cast perform in this. A jiggered offering, the cast are either one extreme or the other. They're either bolted in place, too scared to say or do anything that isn't explicitly written down, or they're making Brian Blessed look like a sloth, swinging wildly from either highly sedated performances to campy, over-the-top, hamtastic pieces. No one comes out looking good on this, with probably the only positive thing I can say being that Mark Anazold is a decent offering in physicality as the Mummy, but Adam O'Neill as Danny, Holly Laningham as Julia, Cyrus Elias as the Sultan, they're all positively pantomime in every sense of the word, with a dub that absolutely doesn't help them.
I completely agree. The costumes don't help, but this acting belongs more on CBBC than it does in a gore-heavy fantasy horror film. The dubbing also takes away a lot of immersion too. Despite being animated, the dubbing is also very lazy sounding and limp. It actually makes you appreciate the kinetic energy the dubbing brings to Godfrey Ho films. So when the acting in your film makes people appreciate the dubbing in Godfrey Ho films, I chalk that up as a loss in my book. Shorthand is that the acting sucks, and not in a fun way.
And finally, the soundtrack. And this is a situation where I kind of respect that they actually got a composer in to do the score for this thing. It's so much better than just diving into library tracks. But it's nothing that'll rock your world in my opinion. You've got 80-ish minutes of vaguely Egyptian sounding music that punctuates the film fine enough when it needs it and is distinct in the fact it's predominantly MIDI composed. But it doesn't stand up outside of this film, and I largely just kind of found it acceptable at best. As for the ADR work, it's horrendous. As it should be, this is an Italian film. The vocal audio is mixed way too high and is unevenly mixed between characters across the runtime. It means Danny sometimes sounds overly quiet while Julia could shatter windows. It's a very lumpy job, and a near total lack of ambient sound here, I don't believe there's any kind of Atmos track in the mix, makes this just another instance where just a little more consideration and care could have gone a long way to making this thing look and feel better.
Did I hear the MGM line in the sound mix for this one? I thought some of the score here worked quite well in the third act and contributed to the overall chaos. Other than that, there is really nothing remarkable about the audio of Mummy's Theme Park. The only remarkable thing is that even by the turn of the century, the Italians thought they could still get away with dubbing an entire film.
The Mummy Theme Park was released on DVD in 2003 by Prism Leisure. The picture quality of this release is fine enough, but extras are a bit thin on the ground, with the film in a scene select being about as good as it gets. And other than that, this film hasn't been seen again since, though over on our website you can arrange to license, distribute or screen the film. So my dream of one day owning the Passeri collection in 4K is still very much on the table. I expect it any day now.
The Mummy's Theme Park doesn't feel like a film from the 2000s. It doesn't feel like a film from any particular decade. It was made completely in a bubble, one I'd nonetheless liked to be a part of, but still the industry had moved on by this point. The Italians really couldn't have been making films like this anymore. No money, no interest, no sustainable means of distribution. Any Italian genre film at this point was lucky even to get a DVD release outside of Italy like this one did. And yet, despite all the impoverished aspects, Mummy's Theme Park still retains some of that Italian B-movie charm. It is high-effort trash that is determined to bring you into its world. It fails, but I still appreciate the effort. Would I recommend it, however? No.
Ultimately, I found the Mummy Theme Park to be a bit frustrating. On the one hand, I actually found this quite entertaining in places for just how strange, over-the-top and odd the whole thing was. The sheer gall to release this as a full retail featured film still leaves me stunned, quite honestly, given how blatant it feels in its intentions. But on the other hand, I appreciate that my taste in cinema can be a bit questionable at the best of times, and I have to be realistic here when I say that, for the vast majority of people, the film would be ejected and thrown in the bin before our core cast even got to the theme park. It absolutely has its moments, but it doesn't hold together as well as Al's other films, and I can't see many being willing to sit through the gumph to appreciate the entertainingly awful parts. Daniel, thank you so much for agreeing to pop back in and take this one on with me. As always, it's been a pleasure working with you, and I'd love to have you back again in future. Do you want to tell us what you've got coming up and where the good people at home can find you?
You can find me at Peckin' for Good TV. I am currently focusing on PS1 and PS2 games in regards to content. I've recently done an hour-long facts video on obscure PS1 games, as well as a mixtape of PS1 racing music. I am proud of both of them, and I sincerely wish that you check them out. As usual, it's been a pleasure.
Excellent stuff, and I highly recommend going to check Daniel's stuff out. He's super thorough and really knows his stuff. So yeah, the Mummy Theme Park. Go and buy Al Passeri's Rubik's Cube solving monkey robot right now. Till next time.